Modern software solutions rarely consist of a single application. In the urge to increase the speed and efficiency of developing and managing software solutions at scale, microservices and cloud native have become buzzwords. They introduce new challenges too, and working with multiple applications introduce new chores. Was it hard to get up to speed when you joined your latest project? Do you regularly do things that you feel could be automated? Is there a more efficient way to work with microservices? Hey everybody, welcome to Improving Productivity of Microservices Development with Project I here at Programmers Week 2021. Thank you for joining me today. I'm really glad you're here. So if you clicked the wrong link and ended up in this talk, I hope you stick around. My name is Pedro Ignacio, but you can call me PI if that's too much of a mouthful. I'm a professional full-stack developer with a strong emphasis on the backend, and I've been working with .NET for over 10 years. I'm really excited about this talk because this is about the natural evolution of development, and we'll be dealing with the bleeding edge of technology. But first and foremost, I'm excited about it because it's about being productive. So I would like to start off by sharing with you one of my favorite quotes. Being productive is not about getting more done. It's about having less to do. Here I'm actually paraphrasing Francis J. But the point here is that at the end of the day, that's what this is all about, making our job and our lives easier so that we can focus on what we do best. This is really an amazing time to be a .NET developer, so let's dive right in. The topics I will cover are: what is TIE? Getting TIE on your machine, developing an app with TIE, containerizing and deploying an app to Kubernetes. And don't let the word Kubernetes intimidate you. I want to make it clear that I'm not Kubernetes expert, and that's part of the idea behind TIE, to remove the steep learning curve there is today so that you can work with it without the need to understand it in detail. We'll also try to deploy to Azure. And lastly, I will talk about my experience using TIE, its shortcomings, and future. Yeah, all of that in 45 minutes. Now, in order to optimize time, I will ask you to please keep your questions till the end. I suggest you jot down any questions you may come up with during this presentation, and you can do it in the chat window, for example. I will tackle them at the end of this presentation. Now, assumptions, what I assume about you. Oops. So in order to benefit from this talk, I will assume you have at least a basic knowledge of .NET Core, microservices, and containers. I've designed this talk for a general audience though. So if you're a .NET developer but don't have experience with some of those things, you should still be able to follow along. So let's go to the main topic here. What is TIE? TIE is a developer tool that makes developing, testing, and deploying microservices and distributed applications easier. TIE is a .NET tool. Just to make sure we're on the same page, a .NET tool is simply a special NuGet package that contains a console application. In other words, it's a command line tool. However, as we'll see in a moment, there is a front end. There is also an official plugin for VS Code, as well as an unofficial extension for Visual Studio. So don't despair. I'm not just going to show you the sometimes drab and lackluster command prompt. TIE is an open source experiment at Microsoft. Yes, it is an experiment. That means that the future of what happens to TIE is not clear. So you may wonder if this talk actually makes sense. Before you hit the red button that says, leave this talk, let me explain what that implies and why you should stay, hopefully, till the end. The fact that it's an experiment means that the development team is trying out radical ideas to improve microservices developer productivity. It's not the first time that Microsoft is conducting an experiment. As a matter of fact, Microsoft has done it pretty much for every major product. We just tend to forget, or maybe we just never get to hear about them. For example, I remember WPF apps were all the rage about 15 years ago or so, and WPF was a skill that was in high demand. But WPF really started out as Project Avalon. If I mention Avalon today, I don't think anyone would know what I'm talking about. But if I mention WPF, you'd probably have an idea of what it is, even if you've never used it. I could give many other similar examples. The point is, this is the beginning of something new. In a not too distant future, something along the lines of what I'm going to present today will likely be the norm, to the point that we'll wonder how we could work differently, just like we wonder today what it was like to work without a version control system like Git, for example. So my goal here is to give you a first look at what the future of developing and deploying microservices might look like. But back to TIE itself, it's hosted on GitHub. A pre-release is available, and that's what I'll be using during this presentation. You can find more information at this URL. So to sum up, TIE is a developer tool. It's a command line tool, but there's really more to it that meets the eye, as we'll see in a moment. It's an experiment, but it's paving the way for a new way to work. It's hosted on GitHub, it's in alpha, and you can help shape its future if you're so inclined. Let's now go and get TIE. So let me close this down. Oops. And here I basically have my web browser, and I conveniently have a link here that goes to the homepage, which is the URL I just showed you. This is the GitHub repository. So I mentioned that TIE is a .NET tool. So I also want to head over to NuGet.org. As you know, this is the repository of NuGet packages, and I will look for TIE. Yeah. Let me click filter here. I said it's a .NET tool. I will uncheck pre-release, and I will hit apply. Nothing found. Now, of course, I did that on purpose. I just wanted to emphasize that TIE is in pre-release. So let's check. Here include pre-release, apply. And there is what I was looking for. So you can see down here, it's in alpha. And what we see here, let me zoom this in a bit. Yeah. That is the command to install TIE. Now, I won't execute it, partly to save time and partly because, well, I already have it installed on my machine. Just believe me that it really takes no time to install. Something important to point out is that TIE needs .NET Core 3.1 in order to work. Since we're here, I want to show you that the author is Microsoft. And also the first pre-release was about over a year ago, so in April last year. Here's a link to the project site, which is this repository here. Great. So Very simple to install Thai, just copy and execute, and you have Thai. So we said it's a command line tool. So I have here a command prompt. And what if I type Thai? It's a bit of a tongue twister. Anyway, so Thai. And yes, it prints help and usage information, which is pretty much what any other command line tool would do if you don't specify parameters, right? So let's see how Thai makes developing microservices easier. And a great way to get started with Thai is the tutorial in the official documentation. Let's head over to the repository. If you go to the docs folder, here you'll find really great documentation to get you started. Many of the articles and blog posts I've seen about Thai revolve around this tutorial. Yeah, here you have tutorials, some recipes, and reference documentation. Now, I want to take that a step further and show you something different. In other words, I don't want to repeat what you can read by yourself. Otherwise, I wouldn't have signed up for this talk. I want to show you what it's like to develop a microservices application with Thai and to deploy it to a local Kubernetes cluster. Now, in the interest of focusing on Thai, it will be a somewhat simple application, but complex enough to give you an idea of some of the problems that Thai is trying to solve. And let me go back to a slide to show you a sketch of the architecture. Yeah. Good. So the application I'll develop is a note-taking application. So it allows me to take notes to remind myself of things. Let me show you a rough sketch of the architecture. Oops. It's going to be a web app. So we'll have a front end, which is represented by this green rectangle here. We'll have two backend services, an API that will handle CRUD operations, and the gRPC service that will keep track of the keywords in the notes that I take. Oops. By the way, if you want to learn more about gRPC, don't miss the talk by my colleague Felipe Ortiz today at 12 p.m. Central Time. That is in about 3 hours or 2 hours and a half. In a nutshell, gRPC is an open source, high performance remote procedure call system that allows synchronous communication between services. But you don't need to understand gRPC to follow my presentation. Back to the diagram, I will add a class library with utility functions and DTO classes to my solution, as well as unit tests. I wanted to make it as close to a real application as possible, and not just the trivial examples that you can find in other places. To keep things simple, these rectangles really map to projects in my solution, but they don't really need to. To keep things simple, I've made it this way. Now the front end talks to the API to perform CRUD operations, as I mentioned, and to manage the frequency of keywords in my notes. The API is the client of the gRPC service. The idea is that that gRPC is used for performance, but I admit this is a bit overkill for this application. It was really an excuse to have at least two services, but again, that's beside the point. It's all about Thai, not about the application per se. Then the idea is that the API persists data to a SQL Server database, whereas the gRPC service uses a Redis cache. And by the way, this is what the solution will look like in Visual Studio. So as I said, this might as well be an e-commerce application or a ticket booking system for an airline. It doesn't matter. I want to show you what it's like to develop this application with Thai. And now, since I'm a terrible typist and I only have about 30 minutes before they kick me out of the room or they mute my mic, I already have some of the code written. What I did, and here I have Visual Studio. Let me expand this a bit. This is what I just showed you. What I did was to open up Visual Studio, create new project, and write some code. You know the drill. I started with the front end, but again, it doesn't matter if I'm writing an MVC application, a RESTful API, or what have you. In this case, my front end is a .NET Razor page application, and that's this here. Now, what would a normal workflow be? That is, how do we normally develop an application like this? Once I have my new project, I will start writing some code. I will run it to check my progress. I will debug it and then continue writing code. That's what we all do, right? Nothing new so far. I will quickly show you how this is implemented, but I just wrote some code. And just for the purposes of this demo, let's assume I started with my front end here. Here I have a bunch of pages. It's a simple application. Maybe let's try to run it. So normally I would just go to, of course, normally I would hit the play button here to start my application. Just to show you something slightly different, I will cd into my source, front end, and the project corresponding to the front end. I will do .NET run. It's building. You've probably done it before. It will take just a moment to build and start the host that listens on the port I configured, which is probably 5,000. I should mention that I'm in a machine that is not particularly fast, but here it is. Here I have my URL. Let's open a web browser. And now it's loading. Yeah. So as I mentioned, this is a note-taking app. And the first thing I see here is that I should have done this, which is a problem, but please ignore that. So really simple application. I can add some notes. Just go jogging. I can set a deadline for that task, create, and it will appear. Now, this is an initial stage of the application. It's using in-memory data, so it's not using a database. So I'm trying to simulate here a situation in which I start coding an application, and I'm halfway trying to see what it looks like, see if there are some bugs, if some logic actually works, and so on. Yeah, so again, so far, nothing new. So if I wanted to debug this, you know, and here I'm looking for the window. Yeah, I will need to start this, set a breakpoint, and something like that. So how does Thai helps us in this workflow? I will just CLS here, and I will do Thai run. Okay, and I will specify the project, or at least the folder of the project. Yeah, and I will hit enter. And notice that I just have an ordinary application, nothing special in the code. These are just razor pages, some logic, some classes. Don't worry about the code, okay? That's not the point here is not the code. I just have some code. And I will run this. So what Ty is doing right now is loading application details, which means that it's trying to figure out what I have. And that's part of the magic, I would say, about Ty, that it just figures things out for you. We can see it's executing my application. It found that I have a project. There is some kind of dashboard running at this URL, and I will copy. I don't need to copy it because I have a link already. It's building the project. It's launching a service. There is a replica. So those of you who worked with Kubernetes may recognize this terminology, but don't worry about that if you haven't, or if you don't know much about Kubernetes. As I mentioned, I'm no Kubernetes expert. And it's in ready state. So let's go and check what we have in this dashboard here. I will just close this. And I will open a new tab, and I have this link, but this is just localhost 8000. Let me show you. This is what I had here, localhost 8000. So we have a Ty dashboard, and it's showing me my app here. I can see it's a project, .NET project at least. I see where that project file is located. I have some bindings. And you may notice that they don't correspond to the same port that I configured in my application. I see there is one replica in ready state out of one, a single replica. No restart. It hasn't restarted yet, my application. I just started. And let's check here. We have some metrics. And by the way, this is using event pipe, which is something new in .NET 3.0, I believe. The thing is that this is showing me instrumental information about the application for the replica I have. And you can see this is updating in real time. Yeah, something changed here. Back to the homepage. I have logs here. And this is essentially the same as what we saw when I did a .NET run, just with different ports, the ports that the application is bound to. And here I have my bindings. I will just click on one of them. And there's the application again. So what does this mean for us? Because I know this may not look like something that can set the world on fire, but what I have here is a panel or a dashboard where I can see the services I'm working with. Of course, if I have a single project, as I have in this case, this may not be too different to doing something like .NET Run or hitting the play button. But let's suppose or assume that I write some more code. Let me close this, or let me stop this with Control-C. You see that it recognizes that it exited, so I will close this. I will close this as well because it's no longer running. Let me close this as well. And I want to show you how I worked with Ty as I was developing the application. I used the watch modifier, yeah, it will do exactly the same. It will start the Thai host and create this dashboard for me and start the service and put the replica in the ready state, so on, just as before. Let me see if I can open this up. You see, we don't have any replica up because, oops, because it hasn't put it in ready state. But as soon as it goes into ready state, you can see that I have my one replica up here. Now, let's say I want to change something, or I don't know, I will just see. Let's just do something silly. Let's change the text here, things to do. And before I hit save, I want to show you how it recognizes that I made the change. It restarts, it creates a new application. Actually, it takes a while to build, but you will see that there should be a new process with a different process ID. Yeah, before it was, my original application had this process ID 11860, and the new one has this process ID. So let me go to the dashboard, open, and here's our change. Yeah, so one nice thing about it is that there is an extension for Visual Studio, and I have it here, that shows me the services I'm running with the replicas. So I can, you know, normally if you want to attach to a running process, you would go to debug, attach to process, but here I conveniently have this and I can just do attach to selected. And now I'm debugging. Personally, I like this workflow. I know it looks like something minimal. There's more to it. I will cover that in a moment, but the point here is that the idea is that I have this dashboard that is my center, like source of information, where I can see all my services. It makes it easy to debug a single service. And let me just open any file, I don't know, index the code behind here. I will just, I don't know, put a breakpoint in here. And if I go to the homepage again, it hits the breakpoint. You know, I can debug easily and do the things I normally do. Again, don't worry too much about the code. I'm just trying to showcase what it's like to work with Thai. So far, maybe nothing special. So let me stop this again. Control C to stop. Let's close this. Yeah. So I'll go a step further. And here I have this is the root folder of my solution. Again, just to remind you, I have my Razor page, my front end here, 2 services, and a web API, RESTful API, and a gRPC service. And what I'll do, I don't have anything else. I will just do Thai run. We can add watch or not, doesn't matter. Here I'm not specifying a particular project. And what Thai will do is recognize that I have this solution. It will recognize the services I have, and we'll see what it shows in the dashboard. Here, the dashboard is already running. So it's loaded here. Again, I'm hitting this link just for convenience, but it's localhost 8000. If 8000 was being used, it would use a different port. And you can see all the replicas haven't started yet. And as soon as they start, you will see that they immediately, you see this started. Great. And here I have a list of my services, which is the one of the things I wanted to show. I have a clear overview of all the services in my solution. Now, something important to mention is that you can see that I have a class library. I have unit tests here, but they don't show up here because they are not services. This will just show me the services in typically microservices kind of solution. So again, I have metrics about each of my services. The TI will assign random ports actually, but this is configurable. And of course, I have my logs here, what I showed you before. Yeah, but this is at the solution level now. Okay. And again, of course, since I started with Watch, I could debug and do everything I normally do. I wanted to mention that right now, the each of the services is using in-memory data. That's what I was actually driving towards. So if I click on this binding, for example, I will start my web application like we saw before. If I click on this one for the API, it will start Swagger. And here I should confess that I cheated a little bit because TI will only show the root folder of, the root path of the binding, but by default Swagger is defined at /Swagger. So I actually configured my API accordingly, which is somewhere here. Yeah, route prefix string empty. I only did this to be able to click on it and have Swagger open. Otherwise, it was the API wouldn't be listening on this path, and I will need to type Swagger to be able to see this front end for my API. So this is actually one of the open tickets in the repository for one of the things they want to improve. There's lots of things they want to improve. Again, this is pre-release. There are still even open questions about TI, but this is more about the direction in which this is going. Okay, enough of this application because this is really using in-memory data. Once I stop the application, it's reset, and I'm not using a database, I'm not using Redis cache, and I want to move to take a look at that. And just to show you, this is in-memory data. And it says from API. Good. So let's close this once again. another thing I want to show you, and I have a cheat sheet here with the commits. We'll check out another commit. Yeah. So git check out this commit. Just to, thanks to the magic of source control, I will fast forward in time to a point where I wrote code so that the front end calls the backend. Let's close all this. And so how to connect how to make the front end call the backend? Let's collapse this. Well, in the first place, you see that here I added this NuGet package. And this is really simple code. Let me show you real quick. If we go to source here in the TIE repository, the official repository, we see this Microsoft TIE extension configuration. This is this NuGet package. And so you can see this is really simple code. So basically what this does is define two extension methods for I configuration, which is the standard for .NET Core, and define two extension methods, get service URI and get connection string. So I added this NuGet package. I go to my startup, and all I did was configure an HTTP client, setting the base address to call what I just showed you. This get service URI, passing the name of the service I want to communicate with. This was really the only change. Of course, I deleted all the in-memory data and those things, but the relevant change was this single statement. So let me run this once again. I will do just a TIE run. Good. We have our dashboard. Good. It's starting the services. And again, the 0 means that there is no replica in ready state. Now they're only in ready state. If I open this up, I can now see that the front end is really talking to the backend, to the API, because this is coming from the API. As you can see here. So again, with a simple solution, I want to mention that you are not forced to use this. If you have a different way of working with service discovery, you're not forced to use what TIE is offering. It's just there for you if you want to use it. Okay, one more thing. I will stop this. Now, if this was everything, TIE probably wouldn't be such of a big thing, but TIE is really a deployment tool. And let's see, what I want to show you now is I will just deploy this to a local Kubernetes cluster. And again, I'm no Kubernetes expert, and there is normally a steep learning curve for Kubernetes. And what Ty is trying to do is simplify that. So if I just do Ty deploy -I, now it's asking me for a container registry. Now I have a local registry running localhost 5050. I could use my Docker Hub account, and that's actually the default, but it'll take time to upload the images, so I'm using a local registry. This will still take some time because it needs to create the images. And what Ty is doing right now is creating images, Docker images for my different services. And it will push them to my registry. Don't worry about the red lines. That's actually Docker. And if you've worked with microservices and Docker images, you know that the normal procedure is to write the Docker file and Docker compose and run commands. And this is just a single command. That's what, again, Ty is all about. It's about simplifying the way we work. Now it's pushing my Docker image. You see, to the web is my front end. It's a bit unfortunate that this takes a little while because I would like to make it more dynamic. But if this finishes within the next minute, I would like to show you what this leads us to. By the way, I'm pointing to a local Kubernetes cluster, but I could also, I'd also created a cluster on Azure, and this might as well be deployed to Azure the same way with Ty deploy and without writing any configuration. That's the point. This is my API. Yeah, it's unfortunately, this will take some time. Okay, well, while this runs, I will put on my headphones. And are there any questions so far?
Hey, Pedro. No, not yet. We don't have any questions in the chat, but we can give people a couple of minutes, maybe questions with, okay, one question is coming in. So regarding deployment, is there a configuration file where you define the configuration used for building the Docker image?
That's a very good question. Yes, I haven't used other dependencies. The idea was to use SQL Server and Redis cache. And there is, I will show you that quickly in a minute. But yes, there is. Yeah, okay, finally this run. Let me go back to that question in a moment. I would like to try this, kubectl, get pods. And don't worry if you don't know what a pod is. Maybe I could do services, service. And here we see my services running on Kubernetes. My API, my front end, and the gRPC service. I will also do a kubectl port forward. This is SVC. I want to the web. This is my front end. And I will do port 5001, port 80. Okay. Yeah, this is creating an ingress into my application to connect to Kubernetes to be able to see it. So I'll go here, I will do localhost, and I wrote, let me check, port 5001. And there is my app running on Kubernetes. I have Docker Hub here. Oh, sorry, Docker Desktop. Oops. And let me, oops. Okay, anyway. I will do it easier. Apologies, I know it's already time, but I wanted to tab and do Docker. Oops. Sorry. Yeah. So I wanted to do Docker container ls to see my containers. I think I already mentioned that my machine is not particularly fast. Apologies about that. Here I have, let's see, my to the web. Let's, and of course, this is my local registry. I will copy this hash code. I will do Docker rm force. So I will kill this container. And that's the idea, that Kubernetes will make sure that it's restarted. So I won't actually see a glitch, or maybe I do. And there it is again. Yeah, my application, even though I killed one of the containers, it's still running. So back to the question, it was a very good question, actually. I will stop this. You can also do try init, just like you can do git init or npm init or whatever init, and Ty will create this Ty YAML file. And let me open it up here in Visual Studio. Yeah. So here you can actually configure many things. There is not much time to go into all the configuration details for Ty. There's really a lot to cover, and covering everything is impossible, but I wanted to give you an idea of the possibilities that Ty offers and the new ways of working that this offers. I don't know if that answers the question. Or if there is any other question. One last thing I would like to mention is that I tried with this application to create something close, or as close as possible, to a real application. I know it's still far from a real application, but that was the idea. And I found some issues with TIE that for pretty much all of them, they're open tickets and they should be fixed in the future. One of them is working with SQL Server, in particular with Entity Framework, which is something that modern applications use, which is an ORM. And if you're trying to incorporate TIE into your project, you can do it to some extent, but just for development purposes. It can help you. Do not use it for production. Yeah, I want to make that clear. Don't use it for production. And if you're trying to use Entity Framework, you won't be able, because in order to create a migration, you know, the command to create the migration needs to know the connection string. And using service discovery, as I showed you, TIE has to be running, but that logs a file and it creates like a circular dependency between TIE and Entity Framework. So that will probably be solved by adding capabilities for TIE to .NET EF at migration or something like that. Any other questions or comments?
Not yet. No, we don't have more questions.
Okay. So we still have a couple minutes, but I would like to thank you for being there and sticking around till the end. My name is Pedro Ignacio, and all this code is available in my GitHub account in case you're interested. And of course, if you have any other questions regarding TIE or related topics, feel free to reach out.